So Cornelia, you studied painting and you work across a range of artistic media. So can you just talk about that? I mean, do you see yourself as a sculptor or as an artist more widely?
I started off as a sculptor, but now I feel I'm just an artist because I work in photography, I work in print, I work with embroidery, I work with all kinds of ways of making work. When I was looking, studying sculpture, all the examples of sculpture historically seem to be about being fixed, about being on a plinth, being a solid mass. And then there was these other artists that I became aware of, and they didn't deal with this solid thing. Their work was ephemeral in some ways. Once I realised there were unstable works out there for me to see, I just took off. It was great. It was a great revelation.
One of the themes that keeps coming up in the work is this idea of, past histories, new lives, new meanings, but also acts of violence. I mean, you've exploded things, you've steamrolled objects as well.
And thrown them off cliffs.
Even better. So how does this idea of violence but also tragicomedy figure in the work?
Well, it originally came from cartoons. Roadrunner, for example, running over a cliff and then suddenly thinking, oh, okay, and then falling. So it's comic. It's comic in that respect, as it references cartoons or early, silent movies. Doing painting for half my degree, I missed the induction courses of all the sculptural techniques. And so I just decided I was going to use techniques out in the world. I was going to use gravity, which is cliff falls, steamrollers, which is to do with compression. I think when you carve a piece of stone, it's thousands of small violent acts to make a smooth sculpture. So I think traditional sculpture always had a violence, but you don't see it because it's all smoothed off. But I think for me, it just had to be part of the process. It had to be part of the A to Z of emotional references I want to incorporate.
Well, that really articulates that fine balance that is so often in your work between chaos and order.
Yeah, I mean, if the process is being chaotic and it's being destructive, and then the formalisation of that is a contrast. I really like that.
So just going back to this idea of exploding, crushing, steamrollering, I mean, another key piece that you've referred to is this wonderful work called 30 Pieces of Silver, which involved steamrolling all these silver items. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, 30 Pieces of Silver is a monumental phrase from the Bible. So it's another found object. And it was all about betrayal. Judas betrayed Christ. So what I did was make 30 coin-shapes, and it was approximately about 30 objects in each. And then it was formalised, so in rows. It was literally 30 pieces of silver because it was in 30 pools. When you squash objects, this is the first time I'd squashed objects, and I wanted to float them on a horizontal plane. And to do that, I had to drill 4 holes in each object, make a plan, and then that plan goes in the ceiling, and then you suspend the object.
So that is very labour intensive.
Oh, and I didn't realise.
I mean, I know too, when you suspend the 30 pieces of silver, you suspend them at a certain height which suggests the original volume of the objects too.
That's right, yeah. So I'm giving them back their volume.
Okay.
They're still, now their meaning's been changed. All these objects had different histories, but they've been united by this one fate.
Often when you talk about your work, you talk about this idea of inhalation and exhalation. So it's almost like you take the breath out of the object, then you breathe it back in.
Yes, I like the metaphor of breathing. And I've made a lot of work over the years that takes that on board as an idea.
Well, let's talk about one of your, I guess, best known works, which does involve an act of violence or catharsis. Let's talk about Cold Dark Matter, which is your exploded shed. Can you talk a little bit about how that piece came into being?
Well, I was sort of looking for another violent act, and then I said I want to blow something up.
We all do.
And it was a garden shed I decided to blow up because I wanted to blow up a house, but I couldn't. So the shed is very much like the attic. It's full of stuff you don't want to throw away.
Yeah, memories.
it's like baggage, you know. It's like, and so when the British Army blew up the garden shed for me, that was a really momentous thing. So the army were really quite keen, really. I mean, we went over to talk to them in Banbury, and they blew up all these things for us to show us what they could do.
Wow.
So it was really quite funny because you know they loved blowing things up. And then when we did go back with the garden shed and all the objects, and they put some Semtex in it, you know, and I detonated it from a bunker.
So once the shed was blown up in this field, you gathered together all the fragments?
Yeah, actually, all the soldiers raked the field and they picked up all this stuff. I'd taken a photograph of the shed inside the gallery before it got blown up, and it had a light on it inside it. And we put the light in the middle of the piece. I suspended all the fragments around the light bulb, small stuff, medium stuff, large stuff, and then the wood itself. And then the shadows were so dramatic, it was great. I didn't really realise how great the shadows would be.
We've talked a little about these large installations that involve many different parts, often in states of suspension, but another part of your practice are these singular sculptures, which you often call avoided objects. So maybe just tell us a bit about that title. What does it actually mean? Well,
it started off with an object that I found in Germany with the aid of a metal detector. I did a whole piece which was called Avoided Object, about things being buried and and then being dug up. And this object was round and it was flat. It looked like a fob watch or something, and it was silver. We scraped the back and we had it tested. It was silver. We didn't know what it was, and so I called it the Avoided Object. And that started off all these small works. So there was the negative of words, which was a little pile of swarf from carving words into silver by hand by a silversmith. Actually, most probably, I can almost think every small thing I've done since then has fitted onto that title.
I mean, it's interesting too, because often with your avoided objects, there's quite a forensic dimension to them as well. I mean, I'm thinking about, for example, there are several avoided objects which take the form of guns. You've got the embryonic Colt 45 firearm, but you've also got a precipitated gun, you've got a sawn up, sawn off shotgun as well.
Well, the sawn up, sawn off shotgun was I made 2 or 3 years ago when I was working in Manchester, and I worked with the police, and I said, oh, could I have some firearms that's been involved in crime? And they said, yes, that's fine. And we got this shotgun, the sawn off shotgun, and then they said, well, we just got to decommission it, and then they got this chainsaw around and chopped it into bits. I thought, yes, this is great. So I loved all the fragments. So the sawn up is the police, and sawn off is the criminal. I like the meaning of the person who is helping me. For me, those collaborators are very much part of the piece and the meaning of the piece.
Now, in 2017, you were appointed as the election artist for the snap election in the UK. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When the snap election happened, they just phoned me up and asked if I wanted to do it.
To be the election artist?
Yeah, to be the election artist. I thought, why not? I'm feeling so upset about the world order as it is. Perhaps I should just, rather than run away from it, I should confront it.
And you actually even made a short film called Left, Right, Centre.
Which was shot at night in the House of Commons and in daytime in the House of Commons, involving a drone and a lot of newspapers. Left and right wing newspapers.
Where do you see yourself now in terms of, current practice, reflecting on where things have come to politically? I mean, in Britain, in America, I mean, it's the same in Australia, a lot has changed.
I don't know. I think we can be lobbyists, Making work about it is not necessarily going to change the world. I think we should just use whatever power we have as artists to lobby and to be influential. In the end, it's all about political will. And there's one thing that's fit on the ground at the moment is political will.